All right, welcome to episode 137 of Convos on the Pedicab. I'm here with my friend Eric Burkhart. Eric is a former CIA agent who wrote the book. Eric is a former CIA officer who wrote the book Mukhabarat Baby. Before we get started, though, we got to give a shout out to our sponsor. Have you been leaving your house outside again? Texas weather can wreak havoc on your home, especially your roof. And if you haven't had it inspected lately, chances are that outside elements could be making their way inside your home. So trust Balcones Roofing and Remodeling to perform a thorough roof inspection and offer long-lasting solutions. They're the only 5-star rated roofer in Austin who specialize in installing the impact-resistant F-Wave Revia and back all roof replacements with a $20,000 guarantee. To schedule a roof inspection, call 512-937-8805 or visit balconesroofsaustin.com. All right, Eric, so happy to have you, man.
Thanks, Alex.
I'm excited. You're graduating a little bit when you start to talk to people from the intelligence community, so
yes,
really pumped.
Well, my comment about the agent, it's an understandable misconception. There are no agents. That's law enforcement. CIA is basically officers.
Yeah. So how did you get started with all that?
Well, I was working as a federal agent for the Justice Department on the bridges in Laredo.
Oh, okay.
And I had lived in Africa as a young man, and I was raised in France, so I had 4 languages by then. And the CIA was really interested in my languages and my overseas living experience. So they recruited me. And I went through the 8 months of background investigation and polygraphs and psych testing and all of that before at the time it was a little over 1 million applications a year were getting hired. One in a million.
Wow. And you made it out of 1 in a million.
I did.
That's pretty insane.
It's a very selective process. The agency does a very good job hiring the right people for the right job.
Okay. How do you feel the CIA is portrayed? How do you feel as though your experience in the CIA compares to how the CIA is portrayed in the media?
Well, there's a little bit of a difference between the entertainment industry and the media. It's a joke if you try and look at what we see in the entertainment industry and compare that to real life experience. But I like the spy movies just as much as everybody else. But the media, the CIA has no real public relations element. It has no a speaker to defend it when people make accusations about CIA involvement in things. It's not like the Justice Department where they can issue a template denial of things. The CIA does not respond to accusations in the media.
They do not respond to accusations in the media.
No. When I heard, the CIA brought COVID into this country, I was hoping someone would come out and say something about it, but they don't. CIA was helping, the stuff on the Twitter files. CIA is OIG, the other governmental agency.
But with the Twitter files, though, you saw documentation where the U.S. government and certain intelligence agencies were communicating with
certain intelligence agencies. People make that assumption to mean CIA.
What were the other intelligence agencies?
The Department of Defense has its DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency. The Department of Justice has its own intel element. So does Homeland Security. All government agencies have their own intelligence officers.
Okay. And so they were the ones that were coordinating with the Biden administration to censor information that was unfavorable to them. Yes,
but I will say that there was classified CIA intelligence that was abused by management of the CIA for political purposes. That actually happened. We had some directors that were so politically motivated that they actually violated, in my opinion, their own oath by selectively using some of the resources of the agency. But that was never rank and file. It was always at the very top where you have your political appointees. Here's an example. The Trump dossier. Well, let's talk about the Hunter Biden laptop first.
That's kind of what I want to bring up, yeah.
A number of former CIA management level officers, retired, signed onto a document saying that they thought the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. And that shouldn't represent the CIA. That represents a bunch of retired guys who are politically motivated. and it gives a bad name to the agency. And I understand why people would consider the CIA part of, this big mess of government influence in cultural issues. But the CIA really is basically a small group of people working overseas on counterterrorism issues, national security issues. They are not involved in Washington. You have to look at the top, and every director of the CIA is appointed by the administration. A new president, say for instance Biden, could pick someone who has no intelligence experience, no knowledge of the process of recruitment and intelligence analysis and all of those elements, and pick them only because they know they will work politically for that administration's agenda. It used to not be that way.
I feel like it's been that way for a long time, though. That's what it seems like.
A long time. Okay, when I was hired, my director was George Tenet.
Okay.
He was a leftover. Well, I was hired during the Clinton administration. He was my director. He was a leftover from the first Bush. The Clintons did not change the director because they realized he was doing a good job. Back when Bill Clinton was president, that politicization of the top branches of government agencies, that rot hadn't set in. It really didn't set in until the Obama administration, because my director was kept from Bush to Clinton, and then kept on after 9/11 by the second Bush. 3 administrations, 1 director. Then Obama comes in, and everything changes. That's when you got Brennan. That's when you got some of these other guys that were Petraeus. Some of these other guys that were very political. When Trump came in, he gave us a new director, a woman, who was sharp, top-notch.
Who was she?
You're going to ask me now, and her name just
Okay,
slips my mind. And she did such a great job cleaning house at the top, and as soon as Biden came in, it went right back to the same formula. Biden turned what Obama started into an art form, putting political appointees as firewalls as a head of government.
Well, it's not
agencies.
Biden; it's the people managing Biden, because Biden can't walk up the stairs without spilling his ice cream cone and falling.
At this point, no. But Biden was very active when he was vice president and when he was a senator. When I talk about Biden, I'm speaking about really my opinion.
Yes.
Okay. When I first got to Washington in the early 90s, we had Senator Biden from Delaware. And one of the first things I learned in Washington, D.C., is that everybody joked around about how corrupt that family was. It was a joke, and nobody would have ever thought this guy would end up being vice president and president, because his whole family was so corrupt. And we would laugh about it, and I guess you live long enough to see things not be so funny at the end of the day.
I agree. It's well put. I mean, I think that, like I said, I just started reading your book, and you kind of briefly went into what it's like being an officer in the CIA. And from what I've gathered, I've literally maybe 5% through with it, right? But it feels like it's almost like watching an episode of The Office. When you go inside the headquarters and look at the politics inside when you're not in the field, it seemed like it was kind of like almost an episode of The Office, which is what you were describing a little bit.
Well, there's going to be bureaucracy in everything.
Yes.
The agency still is a conservative organization. It was when I first was hired. But again, so much. Okay, the agency has about 6,000 employees, maybe a little bit more now. When I was hired, it was less than that. And there were a few hundred operations officers. Those are the specialty ones that have a certain colored badge, and everybody else when you're walking down the hall looks at you special because you're getting all the special training and because you're going overseas. Everybody that works for the CIA wants to go overseas, but only a select few get selected for that job.
Yes.
And that's the operations officers, and sometimes analysts go overseas too, but basically to be posted 2 years overseas and then moved from one posting to another, you have to be an operations officer.
So when you go overseas, who do you answer to?
My chief of station. Each CIA station overseas has a typical hierarchy. You have your officers, your operations officers. You have a reports officer that collates all the intelligence you collect out of that office. that person is also responsible for getting your marching orders. Every CIA office, every CIA station has to respond to the policies of the administration at the time. You don't ask questions, you don't get political. Whatever that administration wants you to collect on is who you target and who you collect on. Whether or not under Obama it was one particular thing, and then under Bush it was basically counterterrorism. You just respond to what the administration gives them marching orders. And above the level of officers in the station, you have a deputy chief and then a chief. And they basically don't do a lot of ops. They sit in the office and look at all the intelligence and make sure it's written up properly and release it to go back to Washington.
Okay.
That's basically how offices are run. And that's who you answer to. Is if you screw up, you answer to your chief of station, who's in the same country as you. And, of course, Washington back overseas is the one that makes the final call on things.
Do you feel as though, as a former officer, you're being looked at differently by the general public now compared to, say, 20 years ago?
20 years ago, I was undercover.
Right. Okay. But I'm saying, like, an officer in the CIA, do you think an officer in the CIA would be looked at differently now compared to 20 years ago?
Yes. 20 years ago, the CIA had a very positive reputation in this country because everybody wanted to be a spy. Everybody thought it was cool. Everybody watched the James Bond and the Bourne Identity, and everybody thought that's the kind of cool job I want to have. Pretty women, models, lots of cool places to live, guns in every pocket. Everybody thought it was cool. That was not the reality.
And there was a pervasive sentiment of American excellence. That was a thing.
Yes. And now I field regular, since I haven't been undercover since I retired, and I wrote my book, which was cleared by the agency. I can see that people are now more suspicious of persons like me, very suspicious. And they come to me with conspiracy theories, and if I do not back up their concerns and their suspicions, then I'm part of the problem.
Okay. But do you think that could also be because now we have an internet and more information is just more readily available to people, so people just know more than what they may have known in the past?
What they know is what they choose to access. I could get online right now and read MSNBC, and then I could switch over to Newsmax and hear the exact opposite.
Yes. No, understandable.
So people choose what they are exposed to.
Right. But, I think that I'm trying to figure out how to say this, because I think that you could look at the average person who works for the CIA and works for the intelligence community, and the majority of people who work for these agencies are extremely patriotic. They love America, and they're willing to put their lives on the line, as well as their social life and everything else, because they love America that much. But like you said earlier, there are political appointees, and there is a bureaucratic echelons that could potentially just be acting against those other interests. And one of the things I was looking at is that, like, in the 1950s, right?
Mm-hmm.
When Allen Dulles was was in charge of the CIA, you had a person like Allen Dulles who helped facilitate color revolutions to help install the Shah of Iran. You had him try to get JFK to start a war with Cuba. Like, there were a lot of like sketchy things that certain people within the CIA did that unfortunately gave the intelligence community not the best name, and I think it's personally unfair to the average everyday person who just wants to serve the country.
Well, if you want to go back that far.
Sure. That's all I'm saying,
What the directors did in those days. And the CIA changed quite a bit after George Bush, the first George Bush, was director.
Okay.
It became much more focused on the orders, the policies of that administration at the time. Back in the day, there were a lot more nuances to the influence that the CIA had during the times of Eisenhower and Kennedy and LBJ. The CIA is, I'm not going to question anybody's patriotism, and everybody I worked with certainly patriots, not just CIA, but military folks.
Oh, 1,000%, yeah, of course.
But when you have a president who has not been exposed to the intelligence that you are getting overseas because he's just been elected, he has to depend upon his intel people and his presidential daily brief to make his policy. Back then, that's where they set their policy. It's a little bit different now. And so your intelligence director might feel like it's in the best interest that we stop any Russian intrusion into the northern hemisphere in Cuba by just settling that issue once and for all and taking Cuba. So that might have been why Dulles was giving advice to Kennedy about foreign policy. Obviously, Kennedy didn't take it because we didn't invade Cuba.
No, he didn't take it, and then shortly there, we're not saying conspiracy theories, but shortly thereafterwards, he does get assassinated on the grassy knoll. And also, I brought my notes, and yeah, so apparently, right before Castro overthrew Batista, the Bush family, they purchased 15 million acres in Cuba to drill for oil. And then Castro nationalizes the oil fields in Cuba, and the oil exploration company that Bush is invested in, gets delisted and faces a $30 million loss. Like there was a lot of
Who invested in it?
I believe the Bush family
back in the 1960s, 50s,
like
and
late
60s.
50s, yeah.
Oh, that's a bit of a stretch.
I mean, it could not be. Maybe that's false information, but that's what that's one of the things that I've heard is that the Bush family, they did purchase 15 million acres in Cuba to drill for oil, and then when Castro reduces it to 20,000, and a lot of people can potentially lose a lot of money because of a certain leader in office, it is not far-fetched to create a media campaign to say, hey, this is a communist, this is a threat to national security, we got to overthrow him to protect American values. Like, people who have a lot of stake and a lot of money invested in certain areas, I wouldn't put it past somebody to try to do something like that, is what I'm saying.
Well, you give a bit too much credit to what the U.S. government can do and can't do. It's a bureaucracy. Things could be a bit more clandestine back in the 50s and 60s than today, that's for sure. The wheels grind a lot slower now. But when you're talking about issues like economic intelligence about economic issues, and what is in the best interest of this country, it's not just about catching Russians and Chinese and terrorists. It's also about what is in the best economic interest of this country. And if a lot of U.S. oil companies have resources and investments in a place like Cuba, it will negatively impact our country if we allow the Russians to take over and let someone like Castro nationalize everything. And of course, all the predictions about what Castro was going to do came true. He turned Cuba into a really nasty place to live.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, you could talk to anybody. You go to Miami and talk to anybody from Latin America, like any Hispanic person living in Miami, they hate communism, they hate Castro. Like there are a lot, like you wouldn't have that many people emigrating from Cuba to Florida if it was a socialist utopia. Like I agree with you on that fully.
At the end of the day, the CIA has always focused on the directives from the administration. At the end of the day, they may advise against what the administration is doing, but they follow the directives of U.S. foreign policy set by the executive. Now, it's always like this, Alex. USA here, everybody else here. Okay? That's what it's all about. That includes economic issues, that includes resources, that includes investments. At the end of the day, the U.S., somebody has to always be keeping us first.
Well, yeah, and especially because of dollar hegemony and because of how our monetary system works, dollar dominance is the reason that we still have a prosperous country in a lot of ways.
Well, yeah, I won't disagree with that.
I mean, like, people, like, the reason that, like, other countries have been, ever since, over the past, like, 100 or 80 or 70 some odd years, there have been a ton of countries that have experienced crippling amounts of hyperinflation, right? And a lot of these people will hold U.S. dollars to offset the crippling inflation. And the reason that they do that is because they trust our currency, and it's because we have also solidified a hierarchy throughout the rest of the world where it benefits other nations to hold our currency. And I think that when you have a system that's backed by our word or backed by force or backed by reputation versus a monetary system backed by gold or Bitcoin or something like that, it keeps like a system like this in play.
Sure, I agree with that.
So I think it is very complicated, and there are a lot of bad faith actors who just say, hey, we shouldn't be involved in this and XYZ without offering a solution as to how to wean ourselves off of that, or how to move towards a better monetary system where we don't need to be involved in a bunch of other where we can function independently from having to be involved in a bunch of other countries. I think that the ultimate path towards a freer, more sovereign society where our freedoms that were put forth in the Declaration of Independence are honored at a greater level is if we become less involved in other countries. Unfortunately, because we don't have sound money, we don't have a sound monetary system right now, our purchasing power and our quality of life and our stability relies on the strength of our dollar. So we need to fix our monetary system before we just become an isolationist country also, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I can't add anything to that because I agree with what you're saying. Does this guy need to go?
No, you all right? No, you're good, dude. You just have at it. Yeah, you're good, bro. You're good. Yeah.
That subject bleeds over into monetary policy, the Fed, our diplomatic relations with other countries, and that's a bit out of my bailiwick, so to speak. But what you expressed makes sense to me, absolutely. Things are a lot different now than they were when I was first working. I didn't pay a lot of attention to that kind of stuff when I was out in the field. I was overseas. And so I can't really add much to that.
Sure, but our actions overseas determine how people overseas look at us.
Yes, and our actions overseas are determined by who people vote into the executive office.
Yes, provided that we have honest elections. Now, here's the other question, Eric, if you're free to talk, if you're able to. Do you think the 2020 election was an honest election?
Okay, this is an opinion.
I'm asking you literally your opinion. This is your opinion.
There's
I honestly don't know.
No question in my mind that there was voter fraud. And it impacted certainly elections at a local level and at a state level. I don't know that it would have risen to the point of being able to actually change the outcome of the election. I don't know that because I don't know exactly how much fraud took place in what particular states. I question a lot of the things that I saw. I was certainly shocked to see Attorney General's office in multiple states all stop counting at about the same time.
That was a little bit odd, right?
That was odd, but then I have to look at the fact that even though we have an electoral system and popular vote does not decide the presidency, Joe Biden still won by, 5, 6, 7 million votes? And I don't think there was 7 million votes of fraud. That would be one heck of a thing to organize.
Perhaps, but that's because a lot of the numbers are from places like New York City and Los Angeles that
Chicago, Philadelphia,
like that carry over into a popular vote. Biden won a lot of swing states by very close margins, by like 1% margins, 2% margins. Like the margins which Biden won, like Wisconsin, Michigan, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada. Really, they were very like toss-up margins. You have county clerks in major cities in those areas that absolutely hated Donald Trump. It's not within the scope of reason that there could have been some kind of a coordinated effort to do something with the election. But it also, if you ever talk to somebody who's a county clerk or works in these offices, like these people are incompetent, like SSRI-dependent idiots. You know what I mean, for lack of a better word. I don't know that they'd be able to like sustain something like that. What I do think happened was that I feel as though we kind of had a miniature color revolution in 2020. that influenced how people thought, and it caused a lot of people to people voted for Biden more out of hatred for Trump versus love for Biden.
Absolutely.
And I
fueled by the media.
Yes, and social and the algorithms on social media and everything else. It felt as though we staged a color revolution in America. Like, it felt as though we staged a color revolution in the United States to influence the outcome of the selection.
Let me ask you something. Have you looked at how many states Trump won by very small margins? Florida.
Was it small? I thought it was pretty.
Well, it was 1 or 2 percentage points. At the
I
end
thought
of
it
the
was
day.
more. No, I thought it was more. I thought it was more in Florida and Ohio.
Ohio was a much bigger win for Trump than Florida was.
Yeah.
But no one's going to ask for recounts there.
No, this is true. 100%.
If you're going to look at voter fraud and you want to do it legitimately, you need to start from scratch. Actually, the truth is we need to put 2020 behind us and focus on removing electoral fraud as a rotted part of the system. Now, we need to do it across the board and not selectively look at particular places that went the way we didn't want them to.
So I don't think that this was a vote. I don't think Trump lost by voter fraud. I just want to say, I want to clarify that. I think that what happened was I think that Trump lost because we staged a color revolution to manipulate the masses to get Trump out of office.
Absolutely. When I think about the media, when I was younger, and I'm 20 years older than you.
Yeah.
When I was a child, we had 3 stations, ABC, CBS, and NBC. And it was the place where you got the news. There was no editorializing. There was no politicizing. And in my lifetime...
I mean, okay, I want you to continue, but...
In my lifetime, I have seen it change so dramatically because journalism, which is inherently political and liberal, let's be honest, they have become much more brazen about their faith in what they think is right and how it's okay to abuse their access to people.
I think, Eric, that there's truth to that, but I think that the news has always been politicized. There's always been an agenda. It's just that people didn't know about it, so they...
You remember back in the 60s
That's what it
and
feels
70s?
like. Well, I know about Operation Mockingbird. And I know that I'm just saying, like, I know about Operation Mockingbird, and I know that the intelligence community have had a lot of their assets in print media and in multimedia, and they have been New York Times and
Who is the intelligence community?
well, the
you're
FBI,
talking
the
about?
CIA, et cetera, et cetera.
How do you know this?
I read articles about it, like
Of
from like
course.
the Times.
I'm sure you read all about it, and we're talking about the same journalists who cannot be trusted, and you're believing what you're reading.
Fair enough. I'm just saying that there has been there has been documentation of the CIA and the FBI bringing a lot of their people into print and multimedia to dictate a narrative.
In my entire career, I never saw anything like that, never experienced anything like that. What I experienced was political appointees at the top of the agency using selective intelligence and their bona fides from their position for political purposes. I never saw CIA operatives having relationships with journalists to influence U.S. politics or internal policy. Never. In my entire career, up to this point, I still haven't seen it.
So all right.
Now, I cannot speak for the FBI. I cannot speak for what was INS and is now Homeland Security, Department of the Interior, the DOD. I can't speak for them. I can only speak for what I have experienced.
So I'm just wondering, like, is Operation Mockingbird not a thing then? Because I mean, there are classified documents on like their website that show that Operation Mockingbird was a real thing. Like that did like Operation Mockingbird did happen.
I can't talk about that.
Okay, I understand.
If I could, I might be able to provide you with some context.
Okay.
Okay. Again, intelligence selectively released, selectively leaked. You never see the full story. You never see the genesis, and you never see the end. There are a lot of operations, I can tell you, that come out of people's minds that end up in traffic, end up in cables, end up written in form that don't go anywhere, and people latch onto that one document and turn it into something that it really
Well, people
wasn't.
also latch onto bullshit too, like QAnon and stuff like that.
Well, that was true. No, I'm just. I'm.
That's cute.
Yeah.
That's cute.
I'm JFK. I wasn't really killed at Dealey
JFK
Plaza.
Yeah, so that type of stuff is absolutely crazy in my opinion.
I met someone recently, a brilliant guy, retired from Raytheon,
Yeah.
designed missiles.
All right.
Very smart guy, wrote a couple books, and he decides to ask me about JFK. And he has been listening to RFK and all this stuff.
Oh, I love RFK, but go on.
And he insulted me by telling me, we all know, everybody out there with a brain knows the CIA killed Kennedy. And I tried to tell him, look, that is not the case. If you want to talk to me about it, you've got to take my experience and my life and what I am aware of, and I'm not going to get into details because, again, I can't.
You can, but also if that did happen, you're not going to be going on this tricycle and saying, "Yep, we did it."
No, but I would not tell you it didn't happen. What I would do is say that's not something I could talk about.
Got you. Okay.
Okay, I'm not going to lie here on your podcast.
All right.
The CIA was not responsible for the death of John F. Kennedy. Common sense. Look at it. What would the CIA have gained by putting LBJ in office? LBJ was no fan of the agency, and what happened? LBJ became president, and things did not go well for the agency at first. It really would not have made much sense, and putting it together would have been. I'm going to leave it at that.
I'd like to offer some counterpoints.
But why?
Because I think people have these theories, and there's legitimate. Like, I'm not saying that I believe in it, but I think that like when Allen Dulles was the chairman of the Warren Commission, and Kennedy fired Allen Dulles because of things like Operation Northwoods and the aftermath of the Bay of Pigs, like that does raise questions.
The Bay of Pigs.
Hold on, wait. Hold on. There's more, and I appreciate you listening. I
wasn't going to get emotional here, but it looks like I'm going to have to.
Okay. And there's all look.
Let's talk about the Bay of Pigs.
Well, you also
I want to
Kennedy,
talk about the Bay
you also
of Pigs.
had Kennedy who openly wanted to pull out of Vietnam, and a lot of people wanted us to go into Vietnam. And LBJ. This is a lot of people feel this way though, and I'm glad that you're here to address why
Revisionist to try and shine up JFK's image. JFK is the reason we were in Vietnam. He is the reason. Who do you think put our troops into Vietnam? Who do you think told the French after they lost Dien Bien Phu, we will move in and stop this communist insurgency? And more importantly, who do you think authorized the Bay of Pigs? JFK. And then he changed his mind at the last minute, and a lot of very brave people died because they didn't have air cover, because JFK at the last minute said, I don't think we're going to do this. And since then, there's been all this revisionist crap that comes out, especially pushed by journalists who want to tarnish who want to shine up JFK's image because now he's the golden star on the hill. Give me a break. There's no context to any of that. JFK was learning on the job as president. I'm not going to say he was a bad president, but he was not interested in getting us out of Vietnam. LBJ kept the same policy in place that Kennedy had lined up, and LBJ made it worse. There's no question about that.
He made it a lot worse.
But we went into Vietnam because of John F. Kennedy. I mean, we had our assets in there beforehand, intelligence assets, some special forces, because we were also helping the French when it was France Indochine, Dien Bien Phu and the battle for, the French were there before us. It was a French colony. And when they left, we moved into the vacuum, and Kennedy was president.
Okay, I mean, look, people have these theories. People feel this way, and I appreciate you addressing them. But I think that, when Allen Dulles is chairing the Warren Commission, then you know that Allen Dulles and JFK did not like each other. That is.
How do you know that? How do you know they didn't like each other just because JFK let him go?
From what I've read, did they like each other?
I have no idea, but I'm not going to say. I don't know what their personal relationship was.
From what I've heard. Through reading numerous articles and watching numerous interviews, that they did not like each other. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But also, how come?
I have no idea.
But here's another thing, though. How come that hasn't gotten declassified after 60 years?
I can't answer that either. I'm not part of the declassification process. I had access to all of those classified documents, which should tell you a little bit about my perspective.
Sure. And I'm listening to it, and I appreciate you sharing it. And I'm only asking these questions so that myself and my listeners get a, examine the events of history through the lens of reality, not through crazy conspiracy theories. And it's good that you're answering what I'm asking.
And it's good, yes, because you and I can play good cop, bad cop.
Sure, yes.
I love it. I'm happy to tackle all of these things and give my opinion. It is my opinion, and I really, really encourage everybody to question. It is healthy to question. But again, as you and I talked about, there's got to come a time when there's an element of common sense that has to come into play, and you have to ask all the questions, not just the questions that are going to support your perspective.
I 1,000% agree with you. I think that's very important. You got to ask every question and talk about every topic, and nothing should be off limits. And I think that that's why you need a free and open internet where all opinions are available and presented, and then the best idea and the best opinion wins versus the censorship that they're trying to push on people right now.
I'd like to use this opportunity to make a point that is very, very important to me. People need to understand that the rabbit holes you find online are there for a purpose. And you have to question the genesis of this information, because there is a political effort in this country to push crazy conspiracy theories so that conservatives look like lunatics. And it's being started by groups and elements on the left,
that also sounds
in
like
the
a
media.
Conspiracy
Well,
theory.
I didn't say all conspiracy theories weren't true. And this is my conspiracy theory.
This is your conspiracy
Yes.
theory.
Well, I know this is accurate. And you know what? People take the bait. They take the bait every single time, and it distracts them from the real difficulties and problems we have today. We end up talking about who killed Kennedy, and we end up talking about the Bushes, and we end up talking about all these things that should be in the dustbin of history so that we can be distracted about what's actually going on today.
But there are also other conspiracy theories that are being pushed by the mainstream media, like we need to get to net zero by 10 years or we're all going to die.
That's so absurd.
But that conspiracy theory is there. Or the COVID vaccine is safe and effective, and if you don't get your vaccine, you're going to kill your grandmother. Like, if you don't wear your mask inside to drive your car, you're going to give everybody COVID. Like, there are a lot of those conspiracy theories that you just see all over Twitter. Like, especially with I remember like a couple years ago, like pre-Elon Musk, you had a bunch of fake doctors with the PhD and the MD telling people that COVID particles can escape through the vents, so that's why you got to wear a mask even when you're in an office by yourself. Like, there was those conspiracy.
Absurd. You're right. You are absolutely right. My favorite one in 2000, I remember hearing that the island nation of Vanuatu, which is just east of New Guinea and north of New Caledonia, was going to be underwater in 10 years. This was part of Al Gore's big climate push.
What was that movie called? Inconvenient Truth.
Yes. And all of this was going to happen, and we were all going to be swimming because the polar ice caps were going to melt, and there was going to be water everywhere. And conveniently, those same people don't talk about that back in the day. And believe me, they had all kinds of specialists and geologists and arguing, and climatologists saying, this is going to happen. Let me tell you, Vanuatu is not underwater.
Well, I'm happy. That's good.
Yeah, it's a nice place.
But I mean, when it comes to like, hey, don't go down the rabbit holes and stuff like that, I think it's one of those things where like a lot of things that people thought were conspiracy theories are kind of feeling like they're coming true, though. This episode is brought to you by Balcones Roofing and Remodeling. Have you been leaving your house outside again? Texas weather can wreak havoc on your home, especially your roof. And if you haven't had it inspected lately, chances are that outside elements could be making their way inside. Trust Balcones Roofing and Remodeling to perform a thorough roof inspection and offer long-lasting solutions. They are the only 5-star rated roofer in Austin who specialize in installing the impact-resistant F-Wave Revia and back all roof replacements with a $20,000 guarantee. To schedule a roof inspection, call 512-937-8805 or visit balconesroofsaustin.com.
Well, we just named some that didn't.
Okay, but let's name some that might be. Central bank digital currencies. That's coming true. The idea of a global government, that stuff is coming true based on things like the WHO pandemic treaty is a potential for coming true. Climate change lockdowns coming true. People have always said that that the elites who go to Davos want to dramatically reduce the world's population. You have people like Bill Gates, and you have other people. You have Jane Goodall. You have people on record talking about how vaccines and reproductive health measures and all types of things are going to dramatically reduce.
Why would you
human
listen to Jane Goodall? Do you know who Jane Goodall is?
I know who Jane Goodall is, but what I'm saying though is that things that we thought were conspiracy theories are now being openly talked about by people who we've known to become the conspirators. And then you have Klaus Schwab. Sorry, I'm almost done. Then you have Klaus Schwab literally saying we need to create a new world order. And this is openly talked about in these Davos conferences that you can just go on YouTube and listen to. And it used to be that the New World Order was a conspiracy. It used to be that the Bilderberg Group was a conspiracy. A lot of these things that people thought were conspiracies wound up being true. So I think it's one of those things where don't go too deep. Don't believe everything you hear, but not every conspiracy theory is fake.
Do you know how long they've been talking about this big world government thing? Do you know how long?
Well, it takes generations to put this into existence.
Well, it hasn't happened
yet.
And
we're a lot closer to having something like that happen now versus 50 years ago.
Try bringing Africa into this big world government. Okay, let's see somebody manage to do that, and South America. And the Trashistan, the Kazakhstans and the Uzbekistans and the Ingushetia Russian republics, and try bringing all of them into this big one world government.
What do you think the objectives are for that? What do you think the roadblocks are?
I'm not saying that the effort isn't there.
I think I think these people are really trying to do that. Will they succeed? Who knows? But it's pretty obvious that these people are trying to do something like this.
Sure, but I just don't see it happening, and I don't see it happening. Whether or not people believe that's what their intent is, they have all kinds of intent, Alex, not just about big world government. They have all kinds of intent, and nothing really comes out of Davos but a bunch of gas.
Nothing used to come out of Davos but a bunch of gas until recently, when it looks like every single local official who's in a liberal city is literally trying to implement the Davos policies front and center, which is also why I go to these city council meetings and openly make fun of them, because the policies out of Davos are absolutely insane if you listen to them.
Because they have the same policies of the guys in Davos, though they would have those policies regardless, because that is the push in this country.
Well,
there are things that are being pushed by those same people that are not part of Davos.
They have the policies in Davos because the Davos class helps get people with their ideas into power.
If you want to see the real impact of what Davos can do, watch Europe. It'll happen there before it happens here.
Well, of course, yeah. We're going to be the last one. We're going to be the last domino to...
And Europe right now is turning right. One country right after the other. And some of them are very much against the climate change push. Some of them are very much against this cultural revolution that's taking place in this country. And I'm seeing the change. I mean, Spain just elected a conservative government. Well, that hasn't been decided yet, but the Conservatives won that election. Hungary, conservative. Italy, Giorgia Meloni, conservative. Yeah. The next president of France is probably going to be Marine Le Pen.
Okay, but that's going to be in 4 years. And what kind of damage could occur in France in those 4 years?
The French will burn themselves to the ground before anything.
I mean, we already were when we had lunch together that one time. We were talking about the little migrant crisis that it looked like France is turning into an Islamic caliphate based on what I was hearing.
No. 90% of France is still Caucasian French people. I'm not being ethnically insensitive. It's just demographics. When I was a child, it was 95%. But France, when they got rid of their colonies, gave a lot of the locals in those colonies the opportunity to become French citizens and move to the mainland. And many of them did. It impacted France, but the French thought it was the right thing to do. But France is not full of... Where my family's from, you don't see migrants. Paris, you're going to see them. Marseille, you're going to see them. But, basically France is still what it was when I was a child.
Okay.
And Germany has a problem with Turkish migrants. A problem. Some say it's not a problem, but they have a large population of Turkish immigrants. Austria as well. Sweden as well. But when you actually look at the demographics, there is no wholesale change.
Sweden actually went more conservative too, right?
Sweden has gone more conservative. The only one that is going in the opposite direction is the UK.
The UK has gotten way super woke.
Yes.
And their prime minister is a big CBDC enthusiast, which is also a little concerning.
Yeah. It is to me too. But so, we started off in Davos. I pay attention to Davos this much because once those fatheads get started, they lose me. It's all about a wider agenda that is never going to take root.
Well, I think that a big reason why it's never going to take root is also because you have people like myself and people like Alex Jones who will listen to these comments and share what they have in store, and then it gets picked up by other conservative news outlets, and we have an opportunity to preemptively say no to this. And a lot of the people at the Davos class, they still need to, despite how powerful they want us to think we are, they still can't implement their policies unless we give consent. And the more this stuff gets brought out into the open, the less likely you are to consent to this happening.
I'm on board with Alex and what he's doing in his message. You lost me with Alex Jones.
Well,
but you had me there at the first. So.
With me? Okay, well, I appreciate that.
Yeah. I mean, I put context into everything. I used to really appreciate Tucker Carlson, and I don't anymore.
I love Tucker. I think Tucker's really been killing it right now, especially now that he's gone independent. I think his last segment with Ice Cube was like one of the most powerful things that I've ever seen.
I may have told you this once before. When we went into Iraq, Tucker Carlson was a young journalist at the time in D.C. There was no one that was more of a warmonger than Tucker Carlson. He was, like everyone else, go and get those people that were responsible for 9/11. Now, he's pivoting because he is sensing the frustration in the public, and he's taking advantage of it, and he's feeding them chum without any... Now, January 6th is a whole separate thing. I'm really glad he has exposed much of what has come out of January 6th. Now, the idea that the FBI had put all sorts of special agents into the crowd to try and encourage people to go and break into the Capitol. If I were in that crowd, you could have brought in Abraham Lincoln to try and encourage me to take a bike ride.
Well, what about Ray Epps? What about Ray Epps?
Hold on. Let me finish my thought. You could have brought in anybody, and it is still my decision to go and take a bicycle rack and crack down the front door of the Capitol building. Okay? That is personal responsibility. You have to take responsibility for your actions. That is federal property.
Okay. Well, you also did say that a lot of people, there are a lot of political appointees who, in the FBI, who were leftovers and relics from the Obama administration.
Yeah.
Based on that, and they don't represent how the majority of people in these organizations think or behave or comport themselves. Is it not within the realm of possibility that those people could have been trying to...
What difference does it make? It's still personal responsibility. I could have your grandmother come in here and tell you to do something, and if you do it, it's still
you still
your
did it, yeah.
responsibility. And you have to use common sense about the actions you take. That is the Capitol building. You can protest as much as you want, but the whole point was to try and impact the electors inside. If you don't like the process, you've got to find a legal way to impact it. Now that's
I feel like Trump also threw a lot of his supporters under the bus by how he did January 6th, too.
I'm certain, no doubt. Now, the after effect, okay, Ashley Babbitt was murdered.
Yeah.
Okay, there's no question about that. By using the standards of the left when it comes to legitimate use of force by a Capitol police officer, there was absolutely no justification for what happened. Okay, I have a lot of sympathy for what happened to a lot of those people afterwards because they were used politically.
Yeah,
they were used and abused, but they were a bit used and abused beforehand as well to try and impact the electors.
I think that people also were worn out and run down from lockdowns and from the riots that were occurring
in 2000,
in 2020.
Lockdowns
of 2020, yeah. Well, the January 6th was in 2020, right?
I know, but the lockdowns didn't really start happening
until 2020.
After January.
No, they didn't. Lockdowns happened in March of 2020, and January 6th of 2021 is when people went to the
Capitol. So it was 2021 when they went to the Capitol.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay. Well, you're right. The lockdowns were happening.
I think a lot of people lost. I think a lot of people were worried about their small businesses going under that they spent their entire lives trying to build. I think that people were frustrated about their speech being censored to an insane level like you see in communist countries. And then they also saw the different treatment that people who were rioting for BLM got during that summer. And then
Absolutely.
all of that
Agreed.
did play, you know.
I agree.
Yeah.
At the end of the day,
Still did it.
you have to be responsible for your actions.
Okay.
And that is where I've lived my life that way. I don't expect anybody else to live their life better or worse than me. I live responsible to my actions, and I don't look to blame someone else for the bad decisions that I have made.
No, but we could look at these events in terms of how do you pick a new leader to get us out of the mess that we're in.
Well, we certainly did not pick a good leader to get us out of the mess that we're in.
No, we got a leader to get us into an even bigger mess.
And we are in a bigger mess. And when you talk about votes, I use Fetterman as an example. Okay, Pennsylvania had a real clear choice in that election. Oz was a great candidate. He campaigned well. He debated well. He was a doctor. He was well educated, very, very established in his ideas about what was right for Pennsylvania. And then you had Fetterman, who won by 300,000 votes. What does that say about Pennsylvania? 300,000
A lot of people
votes.
did not like Dr. Oz, though. A lot of people I think that if Kathy Barnett was the nominee, I think Kathy Barnett would have taken. it
Oh
home.
no, she would not have made up 300,000 votes.
I'd like Kathy Barnett better though than Dr. Oz.
You know, I kind of liked Oz. I got to say I did, because I didn't until I heard him on the campaign trail. And then I really liked what he had to say. He had done his research. He knew all about what was going on in Pennsylvania, and he was going to represent the state of Pennsylvania.
He also made some blunders on his campaign trail when he was like at the grocery store, like "Hello, fellow humans." He pronounced the name of the grocery store wrong. Like that's
That's true. But compared to Fetterman on the campaign trail, falling over,
yeah,
not
but
even be able to carry on a
It
conversation.
doesn't matter though, because they hate it's that is a problem. I think that there is a lot of influence in places like Philadelphia that dictate. I think that Philadelphia determines how Pennsylvania runs.
Sure. And the Republicans are having to scratch votes in the rest of the state, which is basically red except for Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and Republicans also don't know how to campaign in big cities. Like they're terrible at it, and they don't even want. It seems like they don't even try.
San Antonio is a good example of that. You know that there is a real problem recruiting Republican candidates who speak Spanish. Could you imagine how much more success reaching out to the populations that are majority Latino if you had a candidate that could speak Spanish?
Or
like me. I speak Spanish. Nobody's come to me and asked me to run.
Of course. Well, and also, Republican a Republican platform is going to be a little bit different in Austin versus in Blanco County, and that's just the truth. And people don't realize that. Like
that's
you can't
true.
look I could not run to become a state representative and have the Austin area be the majority of my district if I was super pro-life.
There's no way. You're absolutely right.
I you know what I mean? But you have to be extremely pro-life to be considered a Republican candidate.
That's true.
And there's some of these little social things that they have, and I'm not saying that you got to go kill babies and advocating for any of that stuff, right? But this is reality. This is where we are, and I think that there's got to be some kind of flexibility determined, based on where you live and where you're located, and that not being there is killing it. It creates it creates a political monopoly in these areas, and political monopolies are not healthy in terms of freedom and prosperity.
At the state Republican
That's what I'm
convention,
saying.
you'll appreciate this, or you'll understand
Okay.
my discomfort with this. At the Texas State Republican Convention in Houston, the last one, the platform that was released by the state Republican Party announced that the party believed that the gay and lesbian lifestyle was deviant and abhorrent. And that's in the platform of the Republican Party of the state of Texas.
Yeah, you can't win like that.
Not only can you not win like that, that's not about privacy and minding your own business and staying out of people's private lives.
I mean, listen, you could easily say that, hey man, we don't want Sprinkles the drag queen reading stories to your 5-year-old kids, and we don't want men playing women's sports, and we don't want trans surgeries for minors, and you could put that in the platform, but
Sure.
you could also do that while making it very clear that there's nothing wrong with being gay.
It's somebody's personal
Does
choice
that, you know what I mean?
shouldn't. You're right.
Yeah.
That shouldn't have to impact children or any other consenting adult.
Yeah.
That's a privacy issue, and Republicans used to be about privacy. And I've seen a little. Well, I'm not saying Republicans aren't about privacy, but when I saw that, I thought that is a mistake. And it's there. It's there now.
I think it's a blunder. I agree. I think there are a lot of people that are too caught up on the pride stuff, and
Of course.
less focus on the impending loss of freedoms that could come our way if we don't wake up, like central bank digital currencies and WHO pandemic treaty coming to light and all that other crazy nonsense.
I am horribly disturbed by what's happening regarding minors and the transgender push in this country, and also that we spend so much time talking about these issues of sexual identity and sexual and gender. I think it's bizarre that I've lived to see this in my lifetime. I'm very bothered by it. I'm very bothered by the fact that the government looks to recruit people because of their sexual identity, including my agency now.
Yeah.
And that is, to me, it's unconstitutional. It's discriminatory.
Well, also lack of currency debasement and cultural degradation go hand in hand with one another.
Sure. But at the same time, I don't want to be seen as as a Republican, I don't want to be seen as somebody who supports a party of bigots.
Yeah,
and that is what that language was in the platform.
I don't think the people in the Texas GOP are bigots, though. Like, I'm friends with Matt Rinaldi and like the chair and stuff like that. Like, I don't think that they're like that at all. Like, I think they're good.
Well, I know some that are, but the most of the people that I know that are involved in politics, and
are not.
I know people that are involved.
Yeah, of course,
in
they're not bigots.
No, they're not bigots at all. But it was there. It's
easy.
The platform.
Yeah, that type of stuff is. It's really easy for somebody to turn around and make us look like bigots and stuff.
Wow.
It's not. It doesn't. Yeah.
It was unnecessary, and it was like a thing that I think it was maybe a bone to the religious lobby that was there at the convention.
Well, of course, that's what it is.
I can only guess, but when I saw it, I asked my friends about it, and I said, this is abhorrent and deviant lifestyle.
Yeah. Meanwhile, some of the people writing that legislation are on their fourth booster. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like, oh, okay, like that's.
Yeah, and cheating on their wives and
with dudes, probably with dudes in the steam room somewhere.
Yeah,
probably with dudes in the steam room. Like.
Yeah. So, anyways, I just before we move on to other things, I want to again encourage people to not fall for the type of hysteria that I'm seeing that causes people to believe everything they see in social media without using your God-given common sense and life experiences to weed through what is absurd and what isn't. Because you'll find both. You'll find legitimate stuff that should concern you, and you'll find stuff that really is nothing but a distraction.
Well, so before we move on to the next topic, though, what do you think is absurd, and what do you think, like, out of some of these theories, what do you think is absurd, and what do you think is viable?
Well, do you want to talk about Ukraine now?
Let's talk about Ukraine.
Because we can pivot from that into Ukraine, because I've seen stuff about Ukraine online that is really
we should talk about Ukraine. I think me and you have a slightly different approach on Ukraine, and we should address it.
Yes, and I'll try and not get hostile, okay, Alex?
No, I want you to be yourself. It's good for the views.
Yes.
It's good for the engagement.
Well, I know you used to box. I'm an old
man.
No,
I'm not messing with the government.
Man.
I'm not hitting a government officer. Come on.
Yeah, well, I have some tricks up my sleeve.
I bet. Yeah.
We'll start off with this. Okay, I have been, an opinion of mine, I have been supporting Donald Trump since he announced that he was going to run for re-election. And I'm still basically in that position, but I'm beginning to have difficulties with it.
I think a lot of people are, actually.
And I don't think that there is anything criminal in the stuff that he's being indicted for, but it sure is an indication of someone who really shows no self-restraint. I am amazed that he would call the governor of Georgia and start talking about missing votes the day after the election before it's that is really, and I don't think it's criminal, and certainly not worthy of an indictment. But my God, I don't, and being taped. And then, of course, you don't sit down with a bunch of journalists who you got to assume are going to not be in your best interest and pull out documents and say, yeah, look at this classified document. I didn't read classified, but I could. You don't. That's showing off. And for what? It caused him lots of problems.
It's total idiocy.
It's self-inflicted wounds, but at the same time, it's not criminal.
Well, also the way he's going after DeSantis is not something
No, it's very damaging to the party, I think.
Well, it's also like DeSantis isn't. He's not Jeb
not
Bush
hearing-
or John Kasich or any of these other like. He's not like these other people that he was going after in 2016, right? Like he's going after somebody
Jeb
that
Bush.
like he's going after somebody who did a better job of managing COVID than he did. Like he's going after somebody that actually did buck the establishment
Sure.
under the face of insurmounting pressure, and he's going after somebody that actually has tangible plans and the ability and the intelligence to actually put a lot of what Trump wanted to do into play. It's like when you have a kid, you want your kid to be better than you as a parent. Like that's what DeSantis, to me, like you have a movement of putting America first, not starting new foreign wars that are unnecessary, creating a booming economy, and creating a merit-based system for employment and education. And all that stuff is something that we need. And then you have a person like DeSantis who I think is just better at implementing it, who's younger, more charismatic, a better communicator. And so, like, if you're a parent of a movement, you theoretically would want your kid to be better than you. And I think that's what it looks like, is that I feel like DeSantis is that kid who's better than the parent. And if you cared about your movement, you should be, like, proud of your kid to continue your legacy.
Well said. I like the way you put that. Trump is making a huge mistake, and he's underestimating the intelligence of his audience when he tries to push this narrative that DeSantis did a horrible job as governor of Florida, when everything shows just the opposite. But Trump is not a politician. He is a businessman, and he showed in 2016 that as a businessman, you have to crush your opposition. You get personal, and you say what you have to say. Now, Jeb Bush may not have been the greatest candidate. He may not have been the most willful. I mean, he was a little bit spineless, but he was a good man, a very decent man. And
yeah, but that doesn't matter.
And so was Ben Carson, who was attacked personally by Trump for marrying a white woman.
Okay, that's silly. But here's the thing about Ben Carson, and this is another question mark about Trump. Like, you have one of the best neurosurgeons in the world, which is Ben Carson, right? Mm-hmm. And then you make him, and you don't make him the Surgeon General. You made him the Director of Housing.
Because he is black.
But that's stupid. Like,
I know, but it was a knee-jerk decision.
5D chess, yeah. He's playing 5D chess. That's why he's doing it.
Another well said on your part. And I don't want to kick Trump in the teeth, because I am still supporting him, mainly because I want an angry man in the White House. 4 years, one term, someone who has been hurt personally, and that's the kind of man that will hose out. The Justice Department.
Anger combined with self-awareness. Sorry.
Yes, very true. Now, DeSantis, who I do like, DeSantis is a politician, and I have no assurances that when he gets to Washington, he's going to be focused on term number 2, and then we're going to see deals with the Democrats in Congress. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm not. I'm just saying that I don't see that with Trump. I see Trump going in there with a water hose, high-powered fireman's hose, to clean out Justice, the Department of Interior, Homeland Security, and the DOD, and Department of Treasury, all of these politicized.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I see Trump doing, because he's angry and he's been attacked personally.
I could see him potentially trying to do that, but if you saw how he governed in 2020, this is a man who is clearly not an authoritarian and clearly not a fascist, but it's also very clear that he doesn't know how. He's not very good at wielding power. So just because you want to do something doesn't mean that you're going to be effective in doing it. And the pushback from Democrats and from people in like hardcore blue cities is going to be so insane that who knows if any of this will even happen.
Well, you're right. I understand the point you're saying. I think Trump has learned. I mean, he spent 4 years, 2016 to 2020, fighting impeachments and fighting disinformation, stuff about his involvement with Russia and China that were not true. Yeah. And he was learning a bit on the job. But when you hear him talk now, he says the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove all those political appointees at the head of those agencies. And that is what's important to me.
Yeah.
Because that's how you cut off the rot from the top, and then you cut out the garbage at the management level.
Well, DeSantis said
you debride it.
DeSantis also said the same thing, though, too.
Yes, but I don't know what DeSantis is going to do when he gets in office. He's a young man. He's very political, and I like him. I'm not saying I don't like him. I trust Trump at this stage more to do what needs to be done in the government. Now, what I am not happy with Trump is Ukraine.
Share that.
Okay. I heard Trump in his speech just in Pennsylvania yesterday or 2 days ago.
Okay.
And he continued to say, Ukraine bribed the Bidens. Ukraine this, Ukraine that. What happened is pretty simple. Hunter Biden was accepted a position on the board of a Ukrainian company that was corrupt, Burisma. And that company wanted Hunter Biden on their board because they knew that they could access Joe Biden through Hunter, and that Joe Biden would be able to put pressure on the president of Ukraine to fire the prosecutor who was about to drop the hammer on Burisma. We all know this. I know I'm...
Yeah, there's documents of him having this conversation on the phone. Like, you see that, yeah.
Absolutely. And so what happened, they put Hunter Biden on the board, and Joe Biden comes in and pressures the president of Ukraine by dangling $1 billion in aid. You're not going to get this $1 billion in aid unless you remove that prosecutor. It's that simple. Corrupt prosecutor, a good prosecutor, a corrupt company, some corruption in that government. That is not Ukraine gave Biden bribes. The people of Ukraine that are being slaughtered right now, by the average of 8 a day, children and women usually, that's not battlefield numbers, those are numbers of people that are being targeted. The Russian military is not just focused on battlefields. It's focused on infrastructure and civilian targets. And that is, those people did not give Trump or Biden billions or millions of dollars.
Yeah, the regular civil, of course.
It was a company, a corrupt company.
Yeah, it was a corrupt company in Ukraine, and a lot of second world countries like that are hotbeds for corruption.
Sure, lots of them.
That is a thing.
And then, of course, we have our corruption in this country, so it's kind of hard for us to point fingers, isn't it?
I agree. I think that I think that ultimately the best way to assure freedom and sovereignty and progress is to be more, is to have as little involvement in other countries as possible and more involvement in your own country. I do think that, like I said earlier, you need sound money and you need a better monetary system to be able to do that, because we have a fiat system that's based on that's based on nothing but force and reputation. It would be a disaster to become super isolationist right now. I did bring that up, but why do you think Putin invaded?
Well, you're asking my opinion.
Yeah, that's your opinion. Well, why do you think?
But before that, I want to say, you are well versed in the monetary policy issues. I'm not. I don't know how to nuance the current situation to make it work better for us in the future. I don't know what the future holds. It's a bit of a convoluted mess for me. You have it more organized in your head than I do. And I learn from you.
Yeah. Well,
and I appreciate that.
I appreciate this too. So.
But what was your question?
Why do you think Russia decided to invade?
Okay. Well, you have to go back to 2014, and that was when they took Crimea. 2014, they invaded and took Crimea. Now, in 2008, the Russian government signed a treaty with Ukraine delineating the boundaries of Ukraine, the international borders of Ukraine. The Russian Federation signed onto this. It was an international agreement. These are your borders, these are your boundaries, and Crimea was part of Ukraine. So we have to remember that when people start talking about, oh, well, those are really pieces of Russia, Donetsk and eastern Ukraine, and Crimea should have been part of Russia. That's absurd. Now, that's number one. The idea that Putin was feeling threatened by the encroachment of NATO, very possible.
I think that's extremely possible. I think that when Germany, when they turned down the Berlin Wall, one of the agreements was that the Baltic states were not going to join NATO, and there was a non-expansion pact with NATO as to how that's a big reason as to why the Cold War ended and why the Berlin Wall was able to fall, is because there was an agreement that NATO was not going to expand eastward.
Are you sure about that?
Yes.
There was an agreement that NATO was not going to expand eastward.
Yeah, there was a non-expansion pact. Let's look it up.
No. I'm not saying you're wrong, but I don't know what eastward means.
Like expanding to the Baltic regions.
Oh, so just the Baltics. So it doesn't include Poland or Hungary or Romania or Bulgaria, which were all Russian satellite states. Is that not eastward?
I'm not 100% sure on the exact details, but the Baltics, like there was a non-expansion pact in the 1990s.
Now, that's a very possible.
I wrote notes down just so I can like actually have this in context, so we like just for the sake of the conversation.
I'm not saying it didn't. That doesn't exist.
Because like the Secretary of Defense under Clinton literally threatened to resign if NATO moved farther east. And then William Burns, who was the U.S. ambassador to the Soviet Union, and the current CIA head said moving NATO east will cause a military response from Russia. Like this is stuff that was talked about in the 1990s.
Okay, then why didn't it happen when Poland became part of NATO?
I don't know, but I think that
and Czechoslovakia split into the Czech Republic.
When did Poland become part of NATO?
In the 90s, and then you have the Czech Republic and Slovakia, which split off. They used to be Czechoslovakia. When Russia enslaved Eastern Europe, okay, they created Marxist satellite states basically for the economic benefit of Russia. Those people were basically enslaved in all those countries. Yugoslavia under Tito, Albania, Romania under Ceausescu, Bulgaria, Hungary, Poland, the Baltics, and if you want to throw Ukraine in there, but Ukraine was a Soviet republic. It wasn't one of these other supposedly legitimate countries under Russian rule. The Russians did nothing to earn the trust and the favor of those people. Instead, they enslaved them. So the people get their freedom back. Who am I to tell them what decisions as independent countries they can make? And who is Putin to complain when the Russians, just in my lifetime, were abusing those people? How do you tell Finland?
But if you want to put the stop to a potentially fatal at one time or another geopolitical conflict, you should honor what the other side is requesting as a means to why that conflict was stopped. And one of those things was not to expand NATO eastward.
Well, I again, you've seen that. I wasn't aware of that. That maybe it just was meant for the Baltics. Maybe it was just meant for the Baltic states. And even if it was, it would still fall under that rule because now the Baltic states are members of NATO. And they do border close to Russia. I understand Putin's sensitivities about the expansion of NATO. But from my perspective, too bad. You had your chance, Russia. You had your chance to make these client states be friendly to you, and instead you enslaved them. And this is the just desserts of that policy. That's how I see it.
This is like Treaty of Versailles talk almost.
Well, wow.
I mean, on a much lighter scale, this is Treaty of Versailles.
You can make this very simple by just saying Putin invaded a sovereign nation, member of the United Nations, a nation that he had signed a treaty much more recently than this NATO treaty, much more recently, delineating the boundaries of a sovereign nation. And his ideas about taking Ukraine obviously went back to before 2014 when he invaded Crimea, and nobody did anything.
But what about the Maidan coup that occurred in 2013 after Yanukovych rejected the EU association?
That's 2013.
Yeah, then Crimea happened a year later, and Victoria Nuland, who was what was she? She had a very important position when Obama was in office, and she literally funneled money to the Azov battalion to start a coup in Maidan after Yanukovych rejected the offer to.
What's the source of your information? I want to know what the source of that is.
Let's find it. Let's find it, because I don't want to be wrong. I'm just.
I don't even know that you're going to be wrong. I want to know what the source is of that information.
Yeah, let's take a look at it. Let's take a look. Because it's important to get to the bottom of this.
This is just one particular little detail in the whole big picture. It doesn't matter to me. Putin invaded a sovereign country, and he is using blitzkrieg, civilian targeting tactics to try and win that war. That's offensive to me. It should be offensive to everybody. But it's not. A lot of people make jokes about Ukraine, while people are watching their children die in playgrounds because of Russian drones right now, every day.
Hold on, I'm trying to find this. Victoria Nuland Maidan. From the BBC, transcript of leaked Nuland Piat call. Hold on. And apparently, I mean, this might not even be in reference, but let's read it just for a sec. This is from BBC in 2014. An apparently bugged phone conversation in which a senior U.S. diplomat disparages the EU over the Ukraine crisis has been posted online. The alleged conversation between Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland and U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine Jeffrey Piat appeared on YouTube on Thursday. It is not clearly when the conversation took place. Okay, this transcript suggests that the U.S. has very clear ideas about what the outcomes should be for peace and is striving to achieve these goals. Russian spokesmen have insisted that the U.S. is meddling in Ukraine's affair, no more than Moscow, the cynic might say, but Washington clearly has its own game plan. The clear purpose in leaking the conversation is to embarrass Washington and for audiences susceptible to Moscow's message to prepare. Okay.
That Russian disinformation, man, it's a real thing. I know I have friends working for RTI in Paris. The stuff that they are able to put out on social media, disguised as other things. I had a friend of mine recently, a very intelligent person, send me a whole bunch of paragraphs that she'd written, and at the very bottom of it she said, Russia is the good guy, Ukraine is evil. And I just think, how in the world did she get that out of of what's going on the ground right now?
I don't know, but how do you resolve this conflict? What do you do to resolve? Like, what do you do to resolve this? Because one thing that we probably both agree on is that if Trump were in office, we wouldn't be in this situation.
I don't think so. No, but Trump had 4 years and did nothing about the fact that Russia took Crimea.
Okay.
What
but
would
why
Trump
would you want
do
to start? But why do you want to start?
How about Mexico take Florida? And say, we're mad because of the treaties you broke with us in the War of 1848.
Okay, but then here's the other thing too. Like, when an organization like NATO is continuously expanding eastwards more and more towards Russia, one could also argue that how is that any different than than the Chinese government putting satellites in Nuevo Laredo? Like having satellites and soldiers and biolabs and weapons manufacturing facilities and stuff like that in Nuevo Laredo. You know, like that someone could come to the same like argument that it could be very similar.
Well, the fact that Russia is feigning insult and threats because of American economic involvement in Ukraine is pretty absurd, because the Russians for 40, 50 years have been in Venezuela. They were in Cuba. They have been threatening our national security and our borders.
Well, they were also in
my
Cuba
entire
because
lifetime.
the Cubans asked Russia to be involved.
The Russians were helping Castro before, when he was fighting Bautista. They were supporting him financially, just like they were supporting Che Guevara in South America, and just like for a while they were supporting Perón in Argentina. You know, Russia's been threatening our national security interests forever. And the idea that they are insulted because we are spending money in Ukraine is ridiculous. At the end of the day, they invaded a sovereign nation, and they are using really brutal tactics to try and win this war.
Okay, but if the White House wasn't aggressively trying to bring Ukraine into NATO, and there weren't briefings
they
that were
weren't trying
shown
to bring
in
NATO.
2020,
No.
But there are White House briefings that show this. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But
Sure.
okay, if I'm wrong, I'm admitting that I'm wrong. But I'm just going off what I've seen. Like, if there are White House briefings that are talking about bringing Ukraine into NATO, and these same people were the same people that were carryovers from the Obama administration that helped facilitate a lot of these disasters, you would wonder that, if Donald Trump were in office, he wouldn't be talking about bringing Ukraine into NATO or expanding or doing anything like that to even cause that reaction.
I wish.
That's my perspective on it.
I wish our influence with NATO, which should be tremendous, was what you think it is. It's basically not. The Europeans band together and they force policy that we basically acquiesce to. Now, you asked me what the solution was to NATO. Okay, we didn't talk about whether or not I think we should be involved. That's a whole separate thing. But what is the solution? A long time ago, at the beginning of this conflict, any of those European countries, Germany, France, Italy, Spain, their militaries alone, just from one of those countries, could have pushed the Russian army out of eastern Ukraine. They chose not to do that. They chose to hide behind. Are we almost done here?
Maybe like 5 minutes, right? 5 minutes, yeah. Yeah, 5. Okay.
Wow. I'll try and.
You got to come. There's got to be a part 2 now.
Yeah, that's fine because we haven't
Okay.
even gotten into my career and
We haven't gotten anything. Yeah, I know.
the border stuff.
There was a lot of stuff that we could. Yeah. Well, you got to come back for part 2. But let's keep going with this.
Well, no, the whole Ukraine thing, the Europeans could have ended it within a month of the start of it because the Russian military is a paper tiger. And basically now it's nothing but conscripts. That's why he's using drones to fight that war, and that's why he is slowly losing on the battlefield, and that's why he's moved tactical nukes into Belarus, because he cannot lose that war, because he will fall if he loses that war. And I do predict, how is it going to end? I think Putin will use tactical nukes, not against civilian targets, against military targets on the battlefield, once the Ukrainians get those F-16s up in the air and are able to control the air around their advances.
What happens once Putin uses those tactical nukes?
That is going to be very interesting. I don't think it's going to impact us. I think you might see a nuclear strike against Putin and where he is by a particular country in Europe that has that capacity.
Okay, and then what happens then?
There's only one country left in NATO besides the United States in Europe that has the type of nukes, tactical nukes, that can be delivered by a nuclear submarine, a ballistic missile, and that is France.
Okay. So what happens then?
Then Putin's gone.
Do we get right? But do we get a nuclear holocaust? And even if Putin drops a tactical nuke on Ukraine, a lot of our bread and a lot of our wheat supplies come from Ukraine. This is a recipe for food shortages.
I don't think we're getting grain from Ukraine right now. I mean, there's no grain coming out of Ukraine right now. There's some coming through Europe, but Russia's bottled up all that right now. And they are threatening to sink Ukrainian ships and internationally flagged ships in the Black Sea that try and leave. It's a big crisis right now. The Russians refuse to allow that grain deal that they signed to be in effect. That's that. Are you going to look it up now?
No, I'm looking something else up actually.
Okay. So I don't know what kind of grain we're getting. We shouldn't be getting any grain from Ukraine. We shouldn't.
We should be producing everything here. Yeah.
Yes, we should be self-sufficient. It's my understanding that it's really Africa that is going to be suffering the most and has been suffering the most because of the conflict in Ukraine, with regards to grain. They also ship some of it through Hungary and Poland, but those countries have started cutting back on how many imports of grain because it's impacting their internal grain.
Do you think a peace deal is possible?
No.
Why?
Because Putin can't lose.
You don't think that there's a possibility? You don't think that if Trump gets back in office, or we get DeSantis, or we get Vivek, or even RFK, who you don't like, which is fine, you don't think that they could negotiate a peace deal?
No, I just don't. Putin, the only peace deal that the Russians will have is annexing parts of Ukraine to Russia, because Putin has sold that argument to the Russian people.
Okay, so
anything less than that is his end.
Okay, so then why couldn't they? What would the problem be if you just annex the Donbass, which is mostly Russian-speaking people anyway, and you just say, hey, Ukraine cannot join NATO? Like, what if there just comes to a basic agreement? Wouldn't that be beneficial towards saving lives and not funneling a bunch of money and resources that we pay for to a foreign country?
You want to save lives?
I mean, that's just
Putin falling will save lives. You end the fear of aggression against the Baltic states in the future. You end the fear of the next. I don't like the fact that Poland is in NATO. Where does it end with a megalomaniac?
Well, but when you have a paper tiger and a military that's not very effective, it's just they'll be able to just take care of their own problems, and we could live our own lives and not give them hundreds of billions of dollars.
Well, I mean, the paper tiger's there now, and look at the impact it's having on us. He can still put 1 million people in the field. He can still use his nukes as a battering ram, diplomatically and on the battlefield.
Potentially. One of the things that you did say, though, when we ate, is that if you're going to get into a conflict and you're going to get involved into a conflict, if you're going to get involved in a major conflict, your goal should be to end it as quickly as possible. And
yes.
If you cannot end it as quickly as possible, you should try to not get involved in the conflict.
You and I were talking about troops on the ground. We were talking about militaries on the ground. We don't have troops on the ground in Ukraine. We don't have our own special forces military elements on the ground in Ukraine. That's what you and I were talking about. U.S. military fighting a war overseas. Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq. We are not in Ukraine.
We're not in Ukraine, but they're and this is, like I said, for another podcast we're about to wrap up, but this is another symptom of the fact that, like, when you have money that isn't backed by anything, you could spend endlessly on these conflicts, and there becomes more of an incentive to fight a defensive war than to end the war quickly.
I agree with you on that. Absolutely. There's lots of incentives to not end this war, but at the same time, I see it through the lens of someone with my life experiences, and Putin has no compunction whatsoever to slaughter innocent people, and that bothers me. Maybe I'm old-fashioned, but a person like that, he's a psychopath. He went from sociopath. He was head of the KGB when I first got hired. I watched his career, and I got poisoned by a Russian.
Yes, I know.
I have my bias, and I admit that. But Putin, the best thing that could happen for everybody, if Putin were to disappear, that war would end overnight. That's not Trump saying, "Oh, I'll sit the two of them down and the two in one day we'll solve that thing." No, the reality is, if Putin disappears, his house of cards crumbles.
Potentially, but then you don't want him to be replaced with a WEF puppet like a Trudeau or a Macron or something like that, and that's another concern.
Everybody that's surrounding him knows their best interest. If they see him fall, they're not going to step right into that target. They will pivot and try and be part of the new Russia. The war in Ukraine will end. Russians are tired of seeing their young men turned into cannon fodder. I can assure you.
No, I think everybody feels that way. Anyway, listen, I really appreciate you coming on, and I appreciate the fact that we were able to have this discussion where you were openly sharing, where we were openly able to share our views on things in a way that was like fun and engaging, even if we disagreed on stuff. And I really appreciate you addressing my concerns and being so forthright and passionate and straightforward with addressing these questions. I really do appreciate you coming on and doing this.
Yes, and it's all opinions, and I appreciate you because I learned from you.
No, thank you. Yeah,
I really do. You bring a lot of context to my perspective, and I need to get more of that from younger people as I get older. So thank you for that.
Of course. Eric, how do we get a hold of you? Tell us everything, where can we find your book, all that stuff.
Well, my book is on Amazon. I'm not going to tell everybody how to get a hold of me. You know how to get a hold of me.
I know how to get a hold of you.
My book is on Amazon. It's better to look for my name than to try and spell the title because it's an Arabic word.
Okay.
Mukhabarat, which means CIA in Arabic. But Eric Burkhart, ERICBURKHART. My book is called Mukhabarat Baby, My Life as a Wartime Spy for the CIA.
Eric, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Alex.
A lot of fun.
Much obliged.
Yes, sir.